Welcome to The Winning Link, a show dedicated to dissecting business and leadership excellence. We take a deep dive into various aspects of business and operational excellence, current events, and personal and leadership development topics. The guests on the podcast will be credible industry leaders and practitioners, offering a portfolio of techniques and methods for positive growth. Welcome to The Winning Link. We've got an exciting guest today on the show. He needs no introduction, but Mr. Will Waller, he's had a great career in business. I've actually had the privilege of working with him, and he's taking his talents to another level. But I'm excited to have him on The Winning Link because he is a link to success. So I'm going to let him introduce himself without any further ado. Mr. Will Waller.
Thank you, Billy. I appreciate it. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. To your point, I've had a pretty broad career. Have spent 20 years doing corporate HR roles, supporting different aspects of 3 Fortune 150 organizations. And I'm currently the CEO of the National Wheelchair Basketball Association. And we'll talk in a little bit about my journey in wheelchair basketball.
Absolutely. I tell you, Mr. Waller is a master at building culture and shaping talent. But let's start back to his journey. He's been able to overcome diversity and use diversity as a platform to help others learn from his struggles and his challenges in life. And that's kind of how we got connected over time and built a real solid relationship. So Will, let's go back and talk a little about your upbringing and Will's. He has inspired many people from the LeBron James Foundation, where he talked to kids at the blimp hangar, and he helped many kids basically build a platform for success and leveraging his challenges and how he overcame. So, Will, tell me a little about you and your upbringing in Chicago.
For sure. Well, I like to say to people, first of all, I'm not supposed to necessarily be where I am. People, unfortunately, who grow up in an impoverished background, which I did, who grow up surrounded by a lot of negative influences, whether they be gangs, drugs, violence, they don't always get second chances. But I'm fortunate enough to have had second, third, fourth, and fifth chances. But I came up in an environment, Billy, where education wasn't valued, not because people knew the benefit of education and chose to disregard it. It's just that generation after generation in my family, unfortunately, hadn't pursued education. So I didn't have those examples of what education can do to open up doors for you. So I did the absolute bare minimum to get by in high school. I was one of the few people in my family that graduated with a high school diploma. And unfortunately, without a vision of what I could be or the confidence to pursue something beyond that from a post-secondary education, I ended up going down the path that many people unfortunately go down, which is I joined a gang and I started selling drugs. And almost 1 year to the day from my graduation from high school, I ended up getting shot in a gang-related shooting. And that ended up rendering me needing to use a wheelchair full time. So not sure if the camera can see it, but I'm sitting in my chair, and I recently hit the 30-year mark of my disability journey. So it was a tragic situation, a situation that I didn't know how to deal with at first, but eventually came to open up a lot of doors for me.
But you know what's astounding for me is I always say Will's still standing, right? And it's just the way he carries himself from the minute he walked into the office building today. Robin Roberts said it best: "Make your mess your message," and I think you've done that better than anybody I've ever seen, right? You talked about your journey, but your starting point is not definitely your ending point. And I would say this about you, and this is coming from me, right? You've probably gone a lot further than you thought you could go, but now that you know you can compete, you ain't going as far as you're capable.
I think that's very true. And I think sometimes you have to hit rock bottom to realize that there's nowhere to go but forward. And after I sustained my disability, I had 2 really difficult years trying to figure out, how to overcome the psychological setbacks. So a lot of people think about disability and they think physical barriers, these physical things that are going to stop you. My biggest barrier wasn't physical at all. It was the constraints I was putting on myself mentally, which went on top of the constraints I already had on myself by not believing that I could be something. And it took a few different people believing in me and convincing me that I could do more than I thought was possible. And it was a combination of beginning to get my education in junior college and starting the sport of wheelchair basketball, beginning to compete in it, that I finally learned the relationship between hard work and results. And slowly but surely that began to help me realize that there was more potential in me than I ever thought possible. But if I was left to my own devices and my own thoughts and my own lack of positive beliefs, then I never would have made that connection between those things. But yeah, I've come certainly a long way, and we could talk a bit about what that journey has looked like for me. But one thing that is absolutely clear, there's still so much more to go, whether that be my own personal goals from a career perspective, but how well I want to be a father and what that looks like with my 3 kids. But most importantly, how many more lives can you touch through your own journey? Because there's a blessing in the lesson.
Absolutely. I think about the context of business, and I'm going to talk on 2 topics with Will today. One is corporate America and building teams, the value of that talent development, that value of inclusiveness. And then I'm going to talk about the wheelchair MBA and that journey and how he's taking that journey. I remember watching you doing the Olympics, right, on social media. And so, but I'm going to start back to corporate America, the building of talent. You talked about how you invest in others. So give me a little bit about corporate America. Why is it important of talent development and getting people on the front line with you?
Well, I think first and foremost, it's the people of an organization that makes it tick. So every organization has a mission, a vision, values. You can go on websites of every one of the Fortune 500 companies, and you're going to see that they've all checked the box as it relates to each of those things. They either internally they come up with it, or some consultants will help pull it out of the leaders to kind of talk about where they want to go and how they want to get there from a values perspective. But at the end of the day, if you don't truly convince the people who work at that organization that they literally are the most crucial ingredient to the success of that organization, then you're either going to take longer than you want to get there,
absolutely,
or you're never going to get there. So any good HR professional or business professional is going to have as one of their main sort of focus areas attracting the best people, developing the best people, retaining the best people, through engagement strategies and things of the like. And it's only those departments, those functions, those supervisors who truly, not through what they say,
right,
but how they behave, that are going to convince the people who work in their department or organization that they matter. And why is that important? Because when you do, you get more discretionary effort from those individuals. And that's what makes the best organization successful.
What do you think are some of the challenges, especially after COVID and the new way of working, right? Zoom, right? Leaders that used to have command and control no longer have that, right? Through that camera. And it's a combination of ownership, right? And when people own it, you get more out of it. So leaders that did not put people in a position where they included and felt they owned it, I always say in the absence of ownership comes blame. When people don't own it, they blame. And so when you look at the new workforce where people are now behind that screen, and you have to look at influence, right? Respect, trust. But you look at this new way of working, because you have a deep understanding of human resources. What do you see as some of the challenges? It's a twofold question. some of the challenges, and what are some of the recommendations now? Because now you're leading an organization, so you've got the whole sombrero on now, so to speak. So,
well, I think first of all, what COVID and a lot of the virtual reality, if you will, of work has done is it's exposed the cracks that existed. So for the leaders who weren't operating as a servant leader, to give their teams the tools and the resources that they need, the ones who were more of a top-down, hierarchical, command and control, as you said, type of a leadership style. What this virtual reality's done is it's exposed the cracks that already existed. It's sort of put a bit of a microscope, on it, and kind of showed where some of those leadership gaps, if you will, may have existed. So first and foremost, for those people who already struggled as leaders or didn't really see talent as the key differentiator, they're probably struggling even more to retain the best talent and keep them on their team, whether they leave the organization or they move to a different department. It's probably created that type of an issue. And the other thing that I think a lot of them are confronting is that a global pandemic forces everyone to take an inventory of what's important. So us individually, various people who work in different organizations, they're probably asking themselves, have I put my own personal goals high enough up on my own priority list? Have I put family as enough of a priority, right? Because everyone's lost someone.
Yes.
Everyone's seen the struggle related to the pandemic, and that forces people to take an inventory of what's important. So one of the challenges, I think, in general is finding a way to get your workforce, current and future, get them to prioritize work the way that they may have in the past.
Yes.
Everywhere you go, there's a talent shortage.
Absolutely.
It's because people are taking an inventory of what's important to them. And I think a lot of organizations are also probably still trying to figure out, do we need everyone in the building?
Right.
Or can we do this virtually? And how do you arm leaders to be able to understand and learn how to handle a more distributed and virtual workforce?
It's something I was watching two things I want to talk about. One is you talked about the people, and you and I were getting coffee, and the person behind the counter had a shirt on that said introvert. And you gave another word, but the person's answer was, I'm only an extrovert when I'm getting paid. And I thought that was interesting because that's not sincere, right? And it's like I at the end of my workday, I don't want to talk. I wouldn't care if I didn't talk to anyone. And I thought, wow, because me, I have a 2-foot rule. You get within 2 feet of me, I say hello. And it's something my mother taught me, and it's that you make people visible.
They make you valuable.
That's right. And so we used to talk about that. And so that was really interesting to me. But I want to go back to a comment from Elon Musk. He mandated that everybody come back into the office. And then I thought, well, that's his company, that's his prerogative. But it was funny. His tweet, I think it was he goes, well, if they don't like it, they can pretend to work somewhere else.
So it's funny that you bring that up. I was scrolling through LinkedIn, and there was an internal recruiter at United Airlines. He posted the article that said what Elon Musk had declared, right, which is that everyone has to come back into work. And he said, United Airlines is looking for people who want to work virtually. So if you Tesla employees want to continue your virtual work situation, come on over to United Airlines and put the link in there on how they could find opportunities at United Airlines, right? So I think this is a perfect example of every organization has to decide, what does the new way of work look like for them? And I understand, Elon's perspective.
Right.
And it's interesting that he's in a much younger organization. You would think traditional 100-year plus organizations would be the ones that want everyone back quicker.
That's right.
Right. But it's the reality of everyone has to decide what they want their work environment to look like. But the truth is, people are going to capitalize, right? So the fact that you see another organization so quickly because of the war for talent that still exists to this day, already capitalizing on it and putting messages out to the people at Tesla, I just thought was really interesting.
I am, because, it's a cutting edge labor society now. And what I mean by that, the dynamic of the workforce has truly changed. And think about my great-great-grandparents, right? They worked so that they could live. I talk about this. They had the farm. They had to go out and plant so that they could eat. Where you look at me, I worked so we could live, right? So I wanted to pay for my kids' college, try to minimize their debt, give them a leg up. My kids today and the people that are in the workforce today, they work and live. And so by going virtual the way they did, it created the platform so you could drop the kids off at school, pick them up. You may work later, but it was a work-life balance, and you saw that. And that's what created also the war on talent, because people want to preserve that right to work and live, and it's the new society. And those companies that don't do that, I think they will suffer some repercussions down the road. I think there's a fine shift, a small shift, or compromise, whatever you want to call it, to adjust to the new workforce. But how do you feel about that?
Well, I think every generation has a little bit of everything in it. So there's still, you hear about millennials and a lot of people like to poke at what they can't do or what they won't do and whatnot. But there's really hardworking millennials too, right?
Yes.
So every generation is comprised of a lot of different work styles and whatnot. But what I think that this virtual work reality requires is that you have the right systems and tools and processes in place that allow for the people who do want to work their schedule in the office. You got the tools that allow them to effectively do that. For the people who prefer to work either all the time at home or in some type of a hybrid situation, 50-50, what have you, that those individuals also have the tools. So your tools are flexible to accommodate these different work styles, which are going to become more and more standard or normal, if you will. So how many times is a leader checking in for their one-on-one? How many times is that leader shifting that one-on-one to be more about what the employee is looking for versus what that leader needs from that employee so that they could hit their bonus at the end of the year? And how do you create a performance management system and a talent management system that accommodates the culture of what you're trying to create from a performance and talent perspective, instead of just relying on, well, I had it in the leader's job description.
That's right.
That they had to be an engaging leader. Well, okay, what's that got to do with anything? Because once you got the job, no one's pulling the job description back out.
That's right. That's right.
And when these leaders are being assessed for their rewards at the end of the year, how many people did they retain on their team?
Absolutely.
Right? How many people were promoted from within?
Absolutely.
How diverse does their team look? Right? What's the engagement survey say about how that leader leads?
Absolutely.
And so the systems have to go along with the words, that are stated as a value statement.
Yes, because I think there is also some gaps. Some leaders get there fast and they don't get developed, right? And that's a missed opportunity, especially with people, right? The war on talent is not going to go away. It's here to stay. The mindsets are different, right? COVID changed a lot of mindsets. I want to transition for a minute into the wheelchair MBA, because I want to give that some exposure, because what you've done in that role has been remarkable. And I definitely support it. We'll be supporting it at the end of the podcast again today, just because I love what you're doing. So, let's talk about the NBA, the wheelchair MBA, and you've actually started to really give that a lot of exposure. I know here in Akron, and I've seen you all the way in Tokyo. So tell us a little about that.
Yeah, well, I have the privilege and the honor to be the CEO of the National Wheelchair Basketball Association, an organization that's been around since 1949. So a lot of responsibility and weight goes into playing a part in the history of the organization. And the mission of the organization is pretty simple. It's to create access to sport for people with disabilities, but not just because playing games and competing for national championships and gold medals is important. The reason why we want to create access to sport for people with disabilities is because it's proven that people who do participate get improved quality of life, whether that be relationships, education, or career outcomes, and ultimately makes them high, upstanding members of society who contribute through their taxes to the organization. But honestly, it's about making people fully integrated into society in all aspects of life. And sport builds the confidence in the tools in individuals. People know it doesn't have to be adaptive sport. People who play any sport know that, right? The leadership skills you get, the communication skills you get, the teamwork skills you get. So that's what the mission is, and that's why we do the work that we've done. But I came into this role shortly after leaving Goodyear, felt a desire to work a bit more on a passion of mine. And in fact, I'd say that, it's more of a purpose. So for so much of my career, I was running from my past.
Got you.
And then what has happened over time is I wanted to begin pushing towards my purpose. Mm-hmm. And what is that? We talked a bit early on in the discussion about my own journey in sport. And the game literally saved my life. People who come from the background that I had, typically they will end up in prison, on drugs, or dead. And I told you I've had second, third, fourth, and fifth chances, but the one thing that gave me that aha moment 2+ years after being in a wheelchair was getting on the court around other individuals who look like me and feeling quote unquote normal again.
So, and that's an interesting topic. I'm gonna save a little bit this later because I want to have a little fun with this. But when you're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, when you said people that look like me, and you're not talking about the tone of your skin.
Right.
He's talking about diversity, equity, inclusion it covers multiple platforms. It's no different than if you and I were in a foreign country and we both heard each other speak English, right? We start to migrate to each other from a standpoint of diversity, equity, and inclusion because we're comfortable in that space.
Right.
But I'm going to come back to that later. Did you play in the wheelchair NBA?
Yeah. So my very first year, so two years after sustaining my disability, after people tried to get me to get out multiple times, I finally caved in. And on a Wednesday night in the summer of 1994, I went out. It's in Addison, Illinois, a suburb of Chicago, and I played in my everyday chair. It had push handles on the back of it. It had armrest on it. It had brakes. Looks nothing like my chair today. And it had a backrest that came all the way up, like almost to my shoulders. But it was the first time, literally, that I felt free, right? And that I was instantly hooked. I was hooked because it was competitive. There was a team aspect of it. I was talking trash, even though I was shooting air balls. It didn't matter. And it gave me some feeling of connection and bond to other people, as I'm saying, that look like me. And to your point on DE&I know we're going to come back to it. It is people with disabilities are typically the afterthought for organizations, right? And there's so many different segments of the population that it's important for organizations to have a strategy for. But people with disabilities are usually phase 2 or phase 3, despite the fact that 1 in 4 individuals have some type of a disability. 1 in 4. the spending power of people with disabilities is the same as Latinos, African Americans, et cetera. So whether you think about the available population of people with disabilities
Yes.
as a talent pool, or you think about them as a targeted market segment that you would be going after with your products and your storytelling, people with disabilities should never be an afterthought.
Right. That's right.
Yep. So yeah, I used the sport for myself. It ended up opening up collegiate opportunities to be a student athlete in college at the University of Illinois. And it was there that I first got a tryout for the national team, first for a world championship team and then eventually for a Paralympic team. But I attribute all of the successes that I had to that introduction that occurred. So when I say pushing towards my purpose in this role with the National Wheelchair Basketball Association is because I want to work as hard as I can to create more outlets of the sport so that people in communities throughout the country, when they're ready mentally to give the sport a try, the sport is available for them in or near their community so that they have the opportunity for that light bulb to go off, that they've got potential, and the sport can be a tool to help them pursue their potential.
You know, we talked about the war on talent, and one of my as chief diversity, the head of diversity and inclusion for Goodyear, my biggest, how I said, the thing that I'm most proud of was creating an environment where people could be their authentic self.
Yep.
Through our employee resource groups, people were comfortable being who they were and coming to work. I still get messages on LinkedIn. I still get personal emails from people from different backgrounds. Let's talk about the opportunity for talent, people hiring people with disabilities. And like you said, often it's second tier. It's the second look.
Yep.
It shouldn't be, right? Because Will Waller was talented, period. Fact.
Just happened to have a disability.
Fact.
Yep. No, I think at the end of the day, organizations all have to start somewhere, right? And people with disabilities, whether they're the first phase, second phase, or what have you, as long as it's listed and they're pursuing it sooner than later, then I appreciate what organizations are doing, and I understand that it's not hard. But for me, it's a matter of people opening up their mindset and their aperture. Because when you think disability, the big misconception is the first things that come to someone's mind are what someone can't do. Right? So I get it that it's not always going to be first, but through exposure and awareness building and getting different people in to support them and educating them on disability, people with disabilities are going to be one of the most resilient groups of your employee base out of them all. So yes, we all have a story. You've got a story.
Absolutely.
I've got a story.
Absolutely.
You can see mine because I'm sitting in a wheelchair. Absolutely. But almost by definition, people with disabilities have had to overcome some extreme circumstance, whatever it may happen to be. Absolutely. And think about that in the workforce, right? Someone's got a project timeline. Someone's got a major initiative and they've got to hit a KPI. Some people are built for a challenge more than others through their experiences and whatnot. And people with disabilities are a group who can handle pressure and they have perspective on what real pressure means, you know? And so to me, that's just an important aspect of it. So when you think about a talent pool, what kind of talent pool you want? You want a tough group of individuals. You want people who can deal with a crisis because they happen. You want people who can communicate through challenges well and whatnot. And so instead of thinking about people with disabilities and starting off with what they can't do,
right?
If you just flip your mindset and understand most of their journeys, you're gonna end up pivoting to a mindset of what they can do, and then they hopefully become a targeted resource for you as you're building out your team.
Yes. What are some of the recommendations you'd give to a company that's looking to broaden their talent base? that's inclusive of people with disabilities?
Yeah, well, I think it would first be educating yourself on how you can tap into some of those populations. I mean, so the National Wheelchair Basketball Association is an organization with 3,000 members. Certainly, we're an organization that has events that bring critical mass together. We have not only that population of members, we have alumni and we have followers, some who have disabilities, some who don't. So finding a way to tap into a database, if you will, and building early connections with this population so that when you do get opportunities that you want to vet, you could potentially do it with a partner like the NWBA. But there's many other organizations like ours. Universities have disabled student organizations. They have departments that focus on catering to this population as they're going through their education process and whatnot. And then there's other associations that are out there. So first and foremost, like any recruiting strategy, where does this talent exist? Where does it hang? What's the best way to connect with that group, right? So if we were trying to go after early career professionals who happen to be Latino or African American, I might be going to the Society of Hispanic MBAs,
That's
you
right.
know, the National Black MBA, right? So you figure out where's the critical mass and you go after it. Disability is no different.
Got you. So let's talk about. I'm gonna stay with the theme of the National Wheelchair Basketball Association. Give me some an overview of your proudest moment since you've been in that role with the organization as a whole.
Yeah.
Because and after that, I'm gonna get into, what are some of the challenges to taking it to the next level, right?
Correct. Yeah. So first and foremost, I think if you look at when I first started the role, the organization had an inverse relationship with revenue and expenses. So the preceding 7 years, expenses exceeded revenue to the tune of, in aggregate, 1.4 million.
Okay.
So in the negative to that extent. 2019 was the first full year in the role, and we ended up flipping that relationship and having a 200% improvement from where we were. So the first time that we had been in the black for an extended period of time. So by doing that, and by no means is that an individual accomplishment, there's a group of individuals that participated in that success. Everyone knows what happened in 2020, the pandemic hit, but had we not changed that trajectory from a revenue and expense perspective, we may not have made it through the pandemic.
Got you.
So that's probably the biggest, but then you say, okay, well, life still has to go on, right? So yeah, you're in the pandemic. We're in the pandemic with a population of people who have more underlying conditions and whatnot. So how do you reintroduce the sport in a safe way?
Yes.
For your population and make it available for those people who still want to participate, they can. And for those people who don't, that there's no negative consequence to those people who don't. They want to focus on their health and safety. We appreciate that. We respect that. But we had this little thing called the Paralympics that took place as well. Everyone knows, well, most people do, that the 2020 games, they were still called the 2020 games, but they were moved into 2021.
Yes.
They took place at the same time in the year that they were supposed to, but the USA national teams or the USA Paralympic teams, we were the only country in the sport of wheelchair basketball to go to Tokyo and return with 2 medals. So from an accomplishment perspective, the staff and the athletes and the people behind the scenes all did a great job of coming up with creative ways to make sure that the teams could still train and bring their best selves in an environment where everyone's questioning what they're doing and why they're doing it, to still be able to go to Tokyo and put their best effort on display for the world to see, which, by the way, NBC did an incredible job with coverage funded by the support of Toyota, who's a sponsor of the NWBA. More people had a chance to see the Paralympics, but also the sport of wheelchair basketball than ever before in the United States. And so I'd say not only did we perform well
Right.
and come home with those 2 medals, but we did it with more eyeballs on the sport than ever before. And it's great because more people got to see it, but why is that great? Because there's a young woman or a young man at some point throughout the country who didn't know that the sport existed before. And they got to see people who look like them on the television, moving freely, being mobile. Yeah, they're sitting down, they're strapped in, they're in a wheelchair, but they see a different version of themselves in these heroes and sheroes that they get to see on the television. And that's why that awareness that Toyota provided was so important. So I feel really great about all of that. And then when you pivot into the challenges, how do you raise enough revenue so that you can build the tools and resources and competencies in the current member base of the member teams, but also those tools and resources for people who are thinking about starting programs throughout other areas of the country. It's all about bringing in enough money. So we could write down the best strategy in the world, right? A lot of smart people in our organization, and we could come up with 75 different great initiatives that all make sense. But if you don't have the revenue to fund that, then it's only really good words on a sheet of paper.
Yeah, I support, because I don't look at it as even a donation. I look at it as an investment, right? Everybody I know that has someone in their family that has some type of disability. You said it yourself, right? Every 1 out of 4, right? You just can see yours, right? When you see you sitting in a wheelchair. But investing in those people, that's why I contribute. So how do people contribute? How would they donate to help?
Well, we're going to drop a link in the description of this podcast, and that's one way. Another way is really simple. You can go to nwba.org/donate, and there's a way to give there. But one of the things that we've also done is partnered with People's Donor Advised Funds. They have different organizations that work with people's portfolios and things of the like. So we've worked with various organizations that manage a donor advised fund, but we've also come up with a process and tools where if somebody wants to make a donation with their stock, as they're thinking about managing and mitigating all the capital gains that they may have in their portfolio, they can make a stock donation directly to us. And because we're a nonprofit 501c3, we can then transact that stock and there'd be no capital gains impact to them. And it's a write-off for the individuals. So
a win-win.
Yeah, absolutely. So you have the opportunity to give to a great cause that changes lives, and you have the opportunity to do it in a way where it might provide some tax benefit to you. And then there's other ways to get involved, right? So when you talk about giving, you talk about time, talent, and treasure.
Absolutely.
What we've just described is the monetary aspect of giving, but there's information on our website, nwba.org/donate, where you could also learn how to volunteer for a local organization or find other ways to get involved with your thoughtware and your thought leadership.
I like that. So, you're an exciting and dynamic guy to talk to. So how do people get in contact with you?
Well, the easiest way to get in contact with me is over email, and that's will@willwaller.com.
Okay.
And I'd be happy, if people are considering wanting to help their organization on their disability journey, happy to offer my insights, happy to connect them with other individuals. For me, at the end of the day, it's about creating more access to opportunity for people with disabilities. I've been the beneficiary of many people opening doors for me. And I've had to push through them and do the work and all of that. But the truth is, without them ever being opened in the first place, Will Waller would not be Will Waller. So for me, I just want to facilitate that process for as many people as possible and help those individuals realize they have potential and help them go after pursuing it.
I love it. Well, I'm going to hit that link that Will talked about as an investment. And Will, I want to thank you for coming on the show today and what you've done. I remember you being at the blimp hangar and you were talking to kids, and kids were looking at you, they may not have been what they'd say in the confines of a wheelchair, but they were in the confines of something else. And you showed them how to release themselves, right? Because that's important. And I'm going to end with D&I, right? Diversity is who makes things happen. Inclusion is what makes things happen.
Correct.
And if you don't put everybody in that, I tell people, I have 13 degrees when I was working in North America. And I said, a pretty smart guy. I said, I was smart enough to earn 2, and I hired 11. And I used all 13 of those degrees. And that's what inclusion is, because I hired also to complement me, right? Not to compete with me. And I let everybody come to the table because, like I say, I'm going to end with, if you make people visible,
That make you valuable.
So I tell you what, Will, thank you for being on the show. This episode is an exciting one for me. Reach out to Will, those that want to continue the discussion and hear more about the Wheelchair National Basketball Association, or just to touch base with Will around the talent, the war on talent. And so with that said, I hope you enjoyed the winning link, because Will Waller is a winning link. Have a good one.
Thank you, Billy.
All right, thank you.
Thank you for listening to The Winning Link. Please go to our website for links to everything that was mentioned in today's episode. Please subscribe to The Winning Link to be notified of our latest news, events, and updates. We welcome you to the Link team.